Thanks everyone for coming. My name's Jeremy Ray. Some call me Junglist. I've written for a few different outlets about eSports and made videos about eSports, more so on the media side of things. So I'll be kind of directing a few questions towards our panelists this evening, and we have about 40 minutes for that, and some time after that for questions if anyone wants to ask our panelists anything. But first off, I might just go down the line here and get everyone to introduce themselves, starting with Eileen.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. So I've been gaming pretty much since I've been about 3 years old. So I've been in it for a while. I was the first female professional gamer in Australia. So Xbox and like Counter-Strike now still. So I went to China and the US on the first gaming TV show back in 2008. So I like to say that I peaked too early perhaps. So I could have had Twitch and everything now and been a millionaire, but that's fine, I'm not bitter about it. And then my interest went into corporate and how, you know, you can bring gaming into or gamification into corporate activities and sort of the cognitive side, I guess, of it. Recently gone back to Counter-Strike because I can't stay away, and now they have a female league. That's great. And so gone back to that to play and loving it. So that's sort of my background and work on that corporate side, I guess, bring gaming into the eSports scene now. Yeah.
Cool.
My name's Daniel. I work for Riot Games, heading up eSports for Oceania. Been gaming since Doom and Doom 2 back on the network in primary school. Yes, also love the Counter-Strikes. Love it. Also always been a big fan of sports, rugby league in particular. So getting to work in an industry that is essentially two of my favourite passions coming together is a lot of fun. So I've been at Riot for about 3 years, working on the eSports team for about 2, and really enjoying it.
I've got about a 15-year background in sports. My name's David Harris. My last real job was a general manager at the NRL. I was there for about 2.5 years, doing a lot of the club-facing stuff in commercial marketing. Got to the point where I got sick of telling clubs how to run their business and getting ignored, so I decided to start up my own sports investment business. Initially looking to invest in traditional sports, but the first deal we got across the line was in eSports, and through luck as much as design seemed to come in at the right time, and we've pretty much pivoted all in over the last 9 months. We've got a number of teams. Our main one is actually working in League of Legends, the LG Direwolves, and so it's just exciting space and an exciting time. And our model is basically bringing the traditional and the commercial sports world together with eSports. I'll probably show my age. I started up a play-by-email game company back in university in the mid-90s, but then had a hiatus in the middle, and now I'm re-entering the gaming industry.
Andrew from Gemba, director of Gemba, funnily enough, a sport and entertainment consultancy. So we work with clients across sports and brands, helping them navigate the world of sport and entertainment from a research, management, consultancy and communications perspective. So clients include Sports Commission, FFA, Cricket Australia, Coca-Cola, Telstra, Toyota, etc. So.
Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that pretty much everyone in the room is kind of already familiar with some of the challenges that we face in Australia with esports. It's been talked about for years and years. Our geography, our internet, the speed of the internet, that type of thing hampers us, and it makes it hard to compete on a global level. With news regularly coming out that things like the NBN is being delayed, and I know my personal rollout was changed from 2018 to 2019 and stuff like that. It's kind of discouraging. So we face the problem of now that we're flying overseas more and going up against global teams more. We face the problem of dealing with the metagame that arises overseas and dealing with other teams that have more resources than we do. So I thought I'd throw this one open to the whole panel, but I know, Dan, you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, especially with League of Legends. What different things can we do to make sure Australian esports players can compete on a global level?
Yeah, so we could solve distance and time and have ping be the same between here and Korea as it is between here and down the road, but obviously that's not possible. One of the key things we did this year was we helped all our teams move to Sydney, and they're all now fully invested in esports, so all our pro players are full-time. One of the problems we had last year was that because the pro players were part-time, they would have uni or a part-time job or something like that, so it was hard for them to practice even amongst themselves. And Dave, I'm sure you understand as well. Now that they're all in and they're training all day long, they're essentially training against each other for 12 hours a day, plus even in some circumstances. So even just being able to play against themselves more than they were, we should see them all improving on where they were last year, and then hopefully we'll find out soon when one of the teams goes to Brazil, and hopefully we're more competitive on the international stage.
Is this something that the Darwells players think about a lot?
Yeah, I suppose people point at it like it's a technical problem, but in some ways it's a physics problem. The speed of light, I mean, you just can't get to Korea and back again, even with a fibre optic cable fast enough. These guys react to milliseconds, so we are quite isolated in Australia, and obviously it'd be great if NBN was fully functioning and everything, but that's not actually going to get us playing against the best teams in the world. So we sent our team over for 3 weeks over Christmas to boot camp in Korea to train and play with some of the best in the world, and that's what they need to do to really try and take that step change to the next level. So unfortunately there's a bit of travel involved, but you can get these guys training with the best around. But we basically brought in a team which was always the third of the top 3 teams basically, but they never had actually the team house or some infrastructure that the 2 of the other teams already had. So by providing that house, we've got a nice place overlooking the harbour in Piedmont, which is a little bit ostentatious, but our whole model is actually investing in things, one, that make them better players, but 2, that we can market, and we're trying to really build the team up as this aspirational group that people can, these guys can play games for a living, overlooking the harbour in Piedmont. It's a great lifestyle we've got, but it also gives them the chance to really take things to the next level. And it's you think it's guys just playing games, but these guys are ridiculously focused. I've spent a long time in sports. I've never seen guys that are actually this much engrossed in the sport or the activity they're playing. So there's a lot we're doing with this extra investment with Support Riot, and hopefully it's going to help us close the gap. I think we're in South Korea just before Christmas, and we saw the mecca for eSports. When you get over there, it's just a game of numbers. They've just got hundreds of thousands of kids in internet cafes, and some of them are bubbling to the top, and they are the best teams by a long shot at the moment. But if you look at the population, we really shouldn't compete on any sport globally. Australia versus China, but we do things better, and that's what we're trying to bring in: the sports psychologists, the coaching techniques, everything around the outside that can close that gap.
Yeah, you mentioned flights, and I remember 10, 15 years ago, flights, it was a big deal to fly overseas to be a part of a gaming competition. And now it kind of seems like, even with broadband and stuff like that, it seems like the main solution to the problem, just being able to fly over more. That becomes very expensive, especially in a game like League of Legends, where you're talking about 5-person teams.
That's right. No, it's, we're obviously underwriting quite a bit of investment with the build that they will come model, but I think that the brands around at the moment, and Condo's done some good research on this. This actually gives access to the millennials, which are very hard to reach at the moment. I saw a stat the other day that 1 in 3 people between 16 and 24 in the UK don't watch terrestrial TV, so it's sort of cutting out that much of the market. So with all these new platforms, that's where the younger generation are living, and it's only going to keep growing. So having a presence there, hopefully will valuable to brands to be able to start that relationship with the younger generation.
If you'll sort of allow me to get a bit theoretical, you mentioned we should be able to compete internationally in pretty much any sport, and I agree, and we do in physical sports. In the real world, Australia punches way above its weight in many, many sports, and it sort of strikes me that when it comes to esports, being a more sort of intellectual sport with lots of different strategies at play and stuff like that, would it be possible to focus on strategies and skills and focus our meta on something that might be a little bit more geared towards taking on the overseas meta, analyzing what's happening overseas and gearing what we do to take that on? And I think you might be a bit more up to date on the Counter-Strike scene than I have. I've been sort of out of it for a little while. I don't know what they're doing
Yeah.
in the States because I'm in Counter-Strike. But
Well, I've, just come back into playing again as well. And at the end of the day, they always say Australia's subpar skill level and they're not going to be able to compete, on the international stage. But it really comes down to you're only as good as the skill level that you're playing against. So we came up against that when we were in the Australian team, that we actually, Australia's demographic is actually smaller on the gaming capacity than it is in the States and in other countries. So the skill gap is, an issue. It's not to do with internet, it's not to do with anything else. It's the actual skill that you're playing against. You will actually replicate that skill wherever you go, if it's on the international stage or wherever. If people want Australia to be competitive in that, the European and the US market, you actually have to compete at that level. So what that means is you have to go to the US and you have to go to Europe and play against that level. Because unfortunately, we are isolated in internet and who we play against. So we do need that. There is a skill gap, and the question is how do we breach that gap or solve that gap? And at the moment it's only we send people over. But I'm sure, coming to the future, there will be another solution.
I'm thinking of Renegades,
Oh, yeah.
as you said.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it's basically what they do is it just a case of just leave Australia?
And that's the thing that, it comes down to, if you look at Australia as an organisation, you want to keep the talent, and that's a big focus of Australian eSports. It is booming and it's becoming a massive, event with everything. So that's why corporates are getting interested. They're interested in the money that it makes. They're interested in the actual community that's being exposed. Being a professional gamer, we've been in this for a while, and when people ask us what the hell is eSports, like, it's this really strange concept, to actually try and explain that to them and bring them on that journey of the potential of what that is, I think that will again bring along that skill gap eventually.
I don't think I think if you, it's for me it's fundamentally no different to where football was 10 years ago. Didn't have an A-League. Didn't have an established domestic competition to raise the standard of and provide a pathway for participants. And 10 years on, that competition is still somewhat in its infancy in terms of global national football leagues. But esports is no different for me if I look at it from a sport perspective, in that you need a sustainable, competitive local landscape. But ultimately, those that are the best and that want to succeed are going to have to play abroad. So for me, I think I draw that analogy back to football and say, unless it's an indigenous sport, our geographical isolation is going to mean that we are going to have to, as athletes in sports, play abroad to play against the best and to keep ourselves competitive globally. Yeah,
and even the A-League's brought in the marquee players now and then, like Hero and stuff like that. And we've got to have that in the OPL as well, haven't we? I mean, those Hellenes players that came over from Korea didn't turn out very well.
Got relegated.
I think that's because there's such a degree of communication. You can be a very skilled player, but it is actually a team game and really does rely on communication. So dropping a foreign star player in doesn't necessarily give you the results you need because they're wandering around in isolation. So
you can't just go kick it to me.
Well, it's El Piero.
No, it needs to be somebody that they can learn from. And it's not just an individual strong player. That's someone who's feed the rest of the team rather than just, he's really good at his position, but if he can teach the rest of them, then it might be worth it.
But then it's, at the end of the day, it's up to why you can say, yes, we have to go overseas. It's up to the pioneers in Australia that it is a booming industry. Well, how do we make the Australian landscape competitive, and how do we do it in our own country? Because we want to make it, we want Australia to be the best, and we want to make it competitive and keep people here and keep people wanting to come to Australia. What's stopping us from saying that Australia is the best in esports? It's not China, it's not the US, it's not Europe. We're responsible for building it ourselves and not just taking the easy road and sending them overseas.
Yeah, and that's really what I want to try and focus on. Like, if there's a way to do that, clever ways that we can do that. And I'm thinking about how we might be able to work on that tactically. Like, football's a great thing to bring up as well, because when we had Hus Hiddink, Aussie Hus, who was doing great for us in the World Cup. Tactically, we were playing at a very high level. It might have been a defensive style that not everyone liked, but we were achieving. And the closest thing that I can think of in the esports landscape was one of my favorite Australian esports stories when a Battlefield 3 team went over to an international competition and just decided that they were not going to play the current meta. And that meant, there were a couple of people who came from Counter-Strike. I think Death Dog was in the squad. They moved over into Battlefield, which meant their infantry skills were quite high, but they weren't as good at the planes and all that sort of thing. So they just decided to do stuff like, we're going to fly a plane directly into their plane, nullify the air battle, and then it's an infantry battle. And they won. They won the entire competition. So I was just wondering if there's something that we could do in other games that were maybe not that crazy, but something similar in that it's targeting their meta in a way they didn't expect, kind of almost using it like an advantage, because they don't watch Australian teams play very often. They don't have the VODs that they do on all the other teams. So could we use that?
There's a good example from Worlds last year, where Worlds is the World Series of League of Legends, happens once a year, and last year the Russian team, who was expected to get wiped out at the very beginning, actually went through the quarterfinals, and it was because they just they didn't give a shit, and they just went in there and they just fought, and all the Korean teams that were used to like really high strategic play just didn't know what to do, and they beat a lot of them, and they got through to the quarterfinals. So. But they adapted eventually.
Yeah.
But it's like that with anything. So what we did, standard Australian, we went in super aggressive, and it's like any strategy that you'll come up with. If you've trained to combat something that is completely what you're expecting, and of course you're going to do really well. But it's like Counter-Strike and everything. If you go in with a strategy that they're not expecting and you're super aggressive, they actually haven't trained for that. It's like any sport, right? So if you switch everything up, you do something completely random, like taking out their planes, or you all rush up mid with AKs or orbs or something and smash through that, they're not expecting it. So it's one of those anomalies that will actually work, because it's so random and no one's ready for the weird.
And as someone who
things that
covers
went down.
esports, that's across every game.
Yeah, exactly.
When everyone talks about the Australian style.
Yeah.
Just all in.
Aggressive and random. Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Well, that's in Heroes of the Storm, that's in League of
it's
Legends, it's in Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
And Counter-Strike's one of those games where a bit more you can have an individual effect. If it's 1v5, there's actually a small chance.
There's a chance, there's a slim chance.
If you're Eileen Bell,
of course, 100%. You got 100% chance.
100% chance of just going out there and headshotting.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, well, I might change it to a different topic. I saw something a couple of weekends ago which I wanted to talk about. I'm not sure if any of you got to see the Australian Call of Duty CWL final that decided who gets to represent Australia over in the World Championships.
I saw it on social media, big comeback, and a bit of grudge match, so yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there were a few things from that match that people love to talk about. Obviously the comeback is one thing. The fact that it's a grudge match is another thing. I was watching. It was over at the ESL studios, and one player had gone from his old team to a new team, and it was those two teams in the finals. It was kind of a big deal, but what I saw was a lot of banter, and not in a way that presented itself well for the sport. I thought what I saw was kind of what was holding esports back a little bit, because we had players not shaking the other team's hand, we had rude gestures, we had verbal banter that was a little bit off the charts, there was a lot of aggression, and I know that's part of our culture, and some of it can be fun and some of it can be good. I think we celebrate it maybe a bit too much. As commentators, we like to talk about it. As journalists, we like to cover it. The players like to egg each other on and tweet about it and stuff like that. But, and Andrew, I'd love to get your comment on this one, because if I was a sponsor looking at that, I would be thinking, these little shits are representing my brand. And I don't want my brand to stand for not shaking the other team's hand.
I just responded. So I thought you were talking about Steve Smith and Vera Cole. But I mean, I think the reality is sport thrives on rivalry and consequences. That's what makes sport. That's why we watch it. That's why we get up at all hours. That's why we don't time shift it. That's why we don't platform shift it. So I think within reason that's going to have an impact on sponsors, but no more so than any other sport or sponsorship property or ambassador or celebrity. So I don't think it's. I think that's probably one of the challenges we save for the violence levels of some games, which does scare some brands off. I think we looked, and this might be a bit controversial for this room, we look to make excuses as to why it's different rather than looking for reasons as to why it's similar to other more established sports, and then that gives us permission to talk about this is where young men are. They are in this sport, not that sport or that sport. So I think sometimes we use those sorts of narrative to go, this is different. That's, as I say, we could be having the same conversation about Bernard Tomic, Nick Kyrgios, Vera Cole. We could have that conversation every Monday morning. A rugby league player where Dave used to work, it's probably his Mondays was ringing sponsors and apologising. So I think we've got to be careful that we don't go, that's eSports, we need to do that to be different. That's competitive sport. And as long as that's within reason and we use that to our advantage and to sort of credentialise the sport, I think that's okay. A sponsor's going to have to make a judgment call as to whether that's the right place for their investment. But I think we kind of default to why eSports is different and why all the buts rather than, as I say, I could list off 10 examples of where I've had that conversation about what might be perceived as a more established sport.
That was my follow-up. Obviously every sponsor has to sort of make a decision on where they draw the line, but what is running through their head when they see something like that? Now that we have larger sponsors like LG, like Maxibon now, what's running through their head when they see something like that?
I think probably a part of them, Dave might be better to speak for LG, but a part of them is going, this is competitive.
Yeah.
That's a byproduct.
Are they thinking this is good?
I think they would be worried if it steps over the line, like anything. Start picking up and throwing monitors around and things like that. But that's going to happen in competitive sport. I think that in the right way that helps credentialise it as a sport, because that happens in every other sport. I think there are other issues as to why or why not sponsors might not get involved than an isolated incident, which it is, right? If it becomes a common thing, then I think it's an issue. But I would say, not knowing enough about the incident, but I would say it's no more than an isolated incident.
I would say
that is, it happened on the international stage when they played each other again during the week, which was quite ironic. There was a lot of passion in there, but at the same time,
so they hate each other.
It's great. Rivalries are great. You actually do need to build these rivalries. It actually, I don't really follow COD, but at the same time, I'll swing both these incidents because they're all over social media because they're two guys getting each other's face after.
Well, that's what we're spreading. That's what we're celebrating. Yeah, but what goes through your head when you're going to sign a player and they have maybe a tendency to be toxic, or for lack of, maybe not quite toxic, but maybe just crossing the line a bit too much with the banter?
Yeah, I think toxicity is a real problem in esports or in gaming, more so much than the elite level, because at the elite level you're actually standing across from the person who's there and you can say something to them directly, but I think a lot of the problem in gaming is that when you're hiding behind a computer screen, you're a keyboard warrior, people are being very toxic, telling a lot of stuff that they'd never say to someone's face. I think at that elite level esports is almost a separate problem. It's not toxicity, it's sportsmanship, I guess, and rights quite good as far as trying to implement shaking hands, etc. And I think that's the way it should be, trying to set the example. These guys are role models, but as I said, I've worked in rugby league in many sports. You need to accept that you'd like them to be clean cut and the perfect role models, but the stories behind a lot of these guys means that's not who they are. There's lines that they come across, but at the same time a bit of passion, a bit of fire, that's actually what the media picks up on and feeds off, and that gets more exposure, which delivers more value to sponsors.
And I think what they'll realise, if they continue to be dickheads, then they'll reposition the athletes that are good at their craft and good brand ambassadors, and the money will just move there.
I can say, as someone who's interviewed people on camera and stuff like that, it is a little annoying when they would choose to use that spotlight moment to score points in a personal grudge. I wouldn't want to interview that person again. I'd want to go for someone else in the team.
Yeah, well, if you look at McGregor though, it's quite, I'm not going side of being athletes being idiots, but at the same time, it's easy to get your moral high horse, and everyone has to say the right thing, being owners, brands, etc. But if you actually look at the numbers, where do people gravitate? They're not to the boring, clean-cut guy all the time. You need to have a bit of personality, but ideally that personality is framed in the right way, but you need to be somehow different from the pack. So
yeah, I mean that's a good point. Because sports interviews in general are completely boring, and that's because sports journalists pick up on every little thing and they try to make the most of it. Especially in the off season, they'll make a story out of complete nothing, which means it forces the players into this super boring place where they just don't give the journalist anything. And we kind of don't want esports to be that, right? Like we want them to be able to talk about tactics and proper stuff.
On the spectrum, eSports is both incredibly clean cut compared to most sports. You don't see a single tattoo out there, or one maybe. But these guys are actually really straight down the line. They actually break the stereotype. Some people would think you're overweight introverts sitting in the corner eating pizza and drinking energy drinks, whereas when you actually get into I was in the wrong Red Bull, but to get into the actual elite level, these guys are highly educated. One of the players that left our team at the end of last year, he's gone taking a job on the New York Stock Exchange after doing a law degree, because he can actually process information so quickly, react to it. So these guys are actually at the elite level. They're not just people off the street that've just gone in and just found something they're good at. These guys are actually at that level. No matter what they apply themselves to, they'll do very well. Which isn't the same for a lot of other sports where there's more a physical component which dominates.
Like 3 years ago, a lot of these guys are just people who were good at a video game. And they had like 22 Twitter followers. And now we put them on a stage, we put them in front of millions of people, they have thousands of followers, and they've just got to get used to they need to change how they talk about certain things. So something we do is every year we bring all the players together and we try to educate them on being edgy and having your brand, and maybe your brand is you're a bit of an arsehole, that's okay. But there's a line where it becomes unacceptable, and it's hard to figure that out. We have to kind of educate them on how to do that, and it's an ongoing battle.
A brand wants consistency, so if you're like that, that's cool. But be that all the time. Don't flip-flop. Shane Warne, whatever you think of him, he's the same Shane Warne 24/7, right? So what we need them to be is consistent. So if that's who they are, be that all the time. So we know what that is, and brands can build a story around that. But if you're constantly flip-flopping and changing your sort of personality and your personal brand, then that's when it becomes really challenging for brands. They don't know what they're aligning with.
That's interesting.
And at the end of the day, at the moment we don't have a governing body. We don't have someone that protects the players and protects the companies. So I'm working with a group at the moment, the Australian eSports Association, that it is trying to legitimise the sport and trying to put a set of values and rules around what happens. And you see it in the news every day, because eSports is actually making so much money. It's imperative that we actually have some governing body around that, because at the moment we have nothing. So while we can say players change, what happens is completely true, but also we have to protect the industry and have some kind of governing body around that. So that's important.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that was happening. What sort of
discussions are
regulations are you looking at?
There's a body that is working towards with the government, so the AESA, and trying to have that sort of governing, be certified with what you're doing, be certified with the competitions, just to protect the players and also the companies from being sued, and having a set of guidelines on what makes good practice in esports, because we don't have anything to run by at the moment, because it's an emerging market, it's an emerging industry.
I've seen a few articles around the place recently about whether or not there should be a player union. Would that sort of fill the space? Would that sort of take care of that news?
Oh look, I think there's always unions that will pop up everywhere, no matter what you do. But I think because where the market is at the moment, and an emergent market. Yes, unions will pop up, but at the moment we just need some kind of structure and regulation around the industry, because we're getting people like Sportsbet and everyone trying to do the gambling thing with it. It's just not going to work. To your point earlier when you were talking about sponsorships, big corporates aren't going to sponsor something like Counter-Strike or one of the war games, because then if you look at it from a corporate perspective, technically I just sponsored ISIS. That's what would happen with it, right? You're counter-terrorism terrorists. Why would you want to corporately align with Counter-Strike? You're just not going to do it. So you're looking at alternatives. Maybe if you modify Counter-Strike to paintball and you're planning an environmentally sustainable plant instead of a C4 bomb, maybe you're looking at those modifications that someone would sponsor that. But, while it's becoming a competitive environment for corporates and people wanting to invest in it, that will actually eventually, in the long term, change the landscape of what games are being developed and why. And am I developing a competitive game that will be eSports, and that will actually change how games are being developed and change the entire industry. So when you look at it from that perspective, then we have to have a governing body, and these are the things that corporate support. It will change, but it's just, luckily for Australia, it is an industry that we can help shape, and we don't have, external influences at the moment as much as Europe and US and other markets do. So that's something that everyone can, get on board and be supportive.
The risk is as though that governance model is not genuinely independent.
Oh yeah,
and
anything. Look at Australia.
But every major sport has spent the last 20 years trying to unravel their governance model to move to an independent commission or governance model. So I think if eSports is looking at a governing body, it should start with the optimal model, because there's, what do they say, Australia's favourite racehorse is self-interest. So it's got a chance. If it's going to establish a governing body and a governance model, it's got a chance to establish a genuinely independent governance model. The NRL is still trying to unravel its governance model to be sort of independent. The AFL, the success of the AFL is you can trace back to when they moved to an independent commission. So eSports can learn from those sports by not making those mistakes over and over again, by having a governance model that is genuinely independent and genuinely for the industry. And if they can do that, then I think there's a lot of merit having a governing body. If you're not going to do that, someone will just start another one.
It's kind of I was wondering if it's even possible to have that sort of governing body across all esports, because every game has its own different needs and different companies exercise different amounts of control over their game.
Well, for me, it's no different to how the FIA operates. The FIA, the Federation of International Motorsport, operates a number of different categories. Formula One, NASCAR, karts, rally, the list goes on. For me, the esports industry is no different. Those sports are publishers, those racing categories are game titles. So they're a precedent. There's precedent around already. So I think you've got to start thinking about it. From my perspective, you're looking at it as a sport, which it should be. You would start thinking about it like that.
And where does the money come from?
Well, the money comes from the industry. The industry has to make a contribution to fund that industry body. It's like the IOC, they fund it through taking a clip of the revenue somewhere along the way. All the broadcast money for the Olympics doesn't go back to the athletes, and it goes back to the IOC.
It would take, I think, some companies, obviously you'd have to convince everyone to chip in a little bit, but some companies kind of let their esports grow very organically without putting a hand in it at all. And I guess, I don't know, would there be any sort of resentment over some companies benefiting from such a body but not really contributing to it?
The problem with esports is the value chain is just so different in different games. Like Riot has a very end-to-end model. They make the game, they run the leagues and all the way down to grassroots, and then underneath sit the teams. Whereas if you look at something like Activision, they've got Call of Duty, an ESL will run a league, or the new E-League, which is sort of Turner Sports. So it just gets it gets quite convoluted, I guess. So I think there's definitely room for a governing body further down, but to get the publishers to buy in, there's probably going to be a fair way down the track, because they've got the most commercial interests, and for them to sign over their business to be run more underneath some other body is probably going to be difficult. But
It's
I think
giving
down
up control, isn't it?
I think down the team and the tournament organisers level and the player level, that's where you can actually have a body to help make sure everyone does what they say, and sort of arbitration when contracts go wrong, etc. That's probably the space you want to be playing in with a governing body, as opposed to overseeing the publishers, which at the end of the day, they're all commercial companies that they're probably not going to sign over those rights anytime soon.
And some, sorry.
So the motorsport equivalent would be CAMS, right? Which wouldn't do any commercial, would look after operational compliance. You know, V8 supercars running, which would be right, would be running their vertical. You'd have, you know, drags, people on it. So I think, yeah, that makes sense. I think there's definitely going to be a need for some standardisation of regulation.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, that level of heavy-handed control can be a very bad thing. I'm thinking about when, like, if we ever do get to a stage where such a body could say, you know, there's this amount of tournaments this weekend, we need the game to be stable. But the event that's in my mind is when Counter-Strike released that Magnum gun, I think it was called the R8 or something like that. I don't know if anyone can correct me on that. But it was almost like a one-shot kill handgun. That was ridiculously OP on the weekend that it got released. And it was later nerfed, but there was a couple of big tournaments that weekend that were affected by that release.
So maybe I'll throw a question to the panel. So if we don't have a body, who rules on match fixing, who rules on performance enhancement drugs? It's probably already happening, but will become a bigger issue for the sport.
Well, for us,
You would.
we rule on it. So we have a global contract database, and all players registered in it. If a player match fixes or does anything wrong in the region, he can't go and play in another region. So we have tried to kind of globalize and standardize how we govern the league. And 5 years ago, you know, League of Legends has been played in front of like 20 people. Now it's millions. The governance has had to catch up very quickly, and it will forever, as it continues to grow, the governance will be a work in progress.
And that's why our initial main investment was actually League of Legends, because they've got the structure there, and it is one body sort of controlling it all the way down. A lot of other sports are a bit more Wild West. There's different tournament providers, teams breaking up and reforming everywhere. It just doesn't have that stability. So one way is actually having top-down control like Riot does. The other is maybe there's room for a governing body, but it's pretty a while off yet. But stability is important for team owners, for sponsors, and for everyone else.
It's Counter-Strike's like a completely different story, because they don't do much for their game other than release updates. Like, they don't, like, you can, you know, they're not going to be sort of weighing in on the matters of a small Australian league at all. It's not going to concern them.
Valve make games.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They don't publish them, and they don't run esports.
And in the case of Counter-Strike, they get someone else to.
Yeah.
I imagine such a body that we're talking about would, it's great, and I think that further into the future, it's definitely a direction of thought that should be given a lot of energy of how they protect the players, but also just through sort of a player's journey through esports, making sure that they gain enough to make it worthwhile, so that when they reach the ends, they think, I've learned enough skills and I've gotten enough out of this experience to make the whole thing worthwhile. Doesn't matter if they rose to the top, doesn't matter if they had to fly overseas to be a part of a competition or something like that. And one of the things that I do praise Riot about is media training the players and making sure they are capable of speaking to camera. That's just what I see as a journalist, because when I interview them, they're the best esports players to interview. I think, okay, I'm about to interview a League of Legends player. They're going to handle themselves all right on camera. And that's one skill that they walk away with at the end of the whole thing. But what else can we do for the players? And I'll throw that open to...
Yeah, I'll start by something we've done already is we mandate what they have to be paid as a minimum. And we back that. So each player receives $10,000 if they play in the 20 split weeks throughout the year. and we pay that through the teams, and we say the teams have to pay 100% of that through the players. So it's not huge money, but it's more than it was last year. It's more than it was the year before. So we kind of guarantee that minimum payment that goes through the players because we want it to be worth. We want them to walk away with some kind of money out of it.
I suppose going back to Andrew's original point, this isn't an eSports problem, this is a sports problem. For every Cinderella story you see, there's thousands that have spat up the other end that don't quite make it or get delisted or whatever. So I think it's important that people are ready for the next step in life. And we're probably at the moment, people are going with realistic expectations that they're enjoying it for a few years. But probably understand that at some stage, at the moment, they're probably going to have to move on to another career. But I think definitely overseas and hopefully soon in Australia, this will become a sustainable career. But not everyone can stay within the industry and become a coach or a commentator or whatever else. That they do need to start thinking about that next step.
Yeah, well, the media side I think is very relevant because I speak to a lot of Call of Duty players who all tell me the same thing, which is that if you're making the most money in Call of Duty, you're not one of the players who wins. Because the money doesn't come from prizes, it comes from your personal brand and your Twitch stream or your YouTube or something like that. And that strikes me as something that we could support in a few different ways. I guess you probably have experience with it because
I completely agree. Yeah, and it is not frustrating, but it's another model that we need to start looking at. We're looking at acquiring a team in a different space, not under the Diabol's brand, and that's going to be more of a marketable brand with people which have the sort of not necessarily the highest performance, but the personalities to be able to engage with fans and build them up as brands in themselves, which streaming is obviously a very important part of. And when you see people with hundreds of thousands, probably about 15 people in Australia, as I understand it, that have that subscriber base, which actually makes them a genuine influencer where they can actually make a full-time career out of it. But if you see overseas that the retired players are making more money than the current players, and it's hard to get yourself to that stage, but it's kudos to them that they've made it.
Yeah, it's like you have to get to a certain stage to be relevant in the competitive scene, but then beyond that, it's all personality. Cool. Well, we might be through all my questions now. Is this the moment where we throw it up into Q&A? Sure.
Yeah, I have a question about. You guys touched on the pay gap, because I watched the doco about professional Australian Counter-Strike players, but all of them had part-time jobs to support themselves. So I'm just wondering, is that pay gap kind of determining our skill in Australia, where we have teams like in NA that their salary that they get is to play Counter-Strike? So they're getting paid to practice, and if we're in Australia, we still have to have part-time jobs to support ourselves, whereas that practice time going and how can we support that?
Look, I think it comes down to skill level as well. You're not going to get paid. It's like the women's league in Counter-Strike, you don't get paid much at all, right? So if you're the best and you're the best on a global scale, you'll get paid for the skill level that you have. Unfortunately, that we touched on before, there is a massive skill gap in Australia, so we're not on par at the moment, so we're not going to get paid as much. Then we can, put an Australian team up and we'll win all the competitions, and then that's when you start to get paid more and the price goes up. It also comes down back to the Australian market. We are a new market, we're not the US, and we're not Europe or China or anything like that. It comes down, it's basic economics. It will come down to the return that we get, unfortunately. So once we start winning and bridge that skill gap, then I believe that the price will go up.
It comes down to commercial realities. No one's making away with bandits out of eSports at the moment. It's, the money's just not there. It's not like someone's hoarding it. The important thing is we work together to grow the paper and pie for everyone, and it becomes sustainable.
I think you're hoarding it down.
Once they're making enough, they can go full time. I think that's when that's not stopping the practice anymore. And that was one of the big reasons we wanted to help the teams with their team houses and help pay them, supply those players with that minimum stipend, was so that they didn't have to have a part-time job anymore. And now, your guys train 16 hours a day or something.
Yeah, we're trying to pull that.
So they've got to, probably a good idea. But they've gotten to the point where they don't need that part-time job and they can focus on one thing.
Over there.
I'd love to hear what is holding the industry back. I mean, the spend on equipment is big, the user engagement is big, being local in Australia. the lack of the viewership, or what is it that prevents it from being in the industry at the moment? What do you see as ways to overcome that?
I don't think it's really been held back. Well, speaking to League of Legends anyway, we've seen year-on-year growth in every metric we've grown every year we've been here. So it's growing for sure. It's growing quickly. Like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, we didn't have a League of Legends league here in Australia, and now we do. This year's a lot bigger than last year, so I think that growth is actually quite healthy.
I think it's a trajectory, but we just started later. Like South Korea started 15 years ago, US and UK kicked off before, but now Australia is starting to get that momentum. So, but I think a lot of the education process is just such a massive generation gap in eSports. Speak to anyone under 25, know all about it. Anyone over 25, unless the kids play or you've been somewhere exposed to the industry, that people just don't know about, whether they're corporates or broadcasters. But that's changing. Even over the last 6 months, I think it's really step change at the moment. So it's exciting times. There's been people who've been in the industry for a long time, grinding away, but it's exciting times for the people who are here at the moment, because I think it's about control.
For me, that's more of a yield conversation. It's already, so from our research, we know it's bigger than netball as a sport, right? So there's 1.5 million highly engaged esports fans in Australia, probably busting that number for about a year now, so it's probably more than that. So it's the yielding of those fans, because we know from our research that those engaged fans account for 80% of the sport's commercial revenue. So the 4.3 fanatics of cricket drive 80% of Cricket Australia's revenue, whether that's subscriptions to My Cricket, merchandise, membership, going to games, Foxtel subscriptions, whatever that might be. They drive 80% of that subscription. So it's not about the industries being held back, it's just we haven't yet got to a point where we're realising the commercial potential of it, for me, more than the actual sport itself. Because if I say it's bigger than sports like netball, it's bigger than sports like horse racing, it's bigger than hockey, it's bigger than cycling, it's bigger than golf, and those fans are all under 30, then it's a commercial conversation as to why aren't we commercialising it? Not that the sport's being held back, it's just not commercialising that fan base yet. And that will come.
It's great that in the US. I think the average commercialisation per fan is about $15 in the US and NBA, and in esports it's about $2. So it's just that massive gap of how you commercialise it properly. And I've given a presentation previously where I think talk about rugby league, 6.6 million people interested in it. There's about half that are fanatical, your avid supporters. You've got about 330,000 members, and then you've got outside that, you've got about 1.7 million people turning up to events. If you look at League of Legends, there's 100 million players, people interested beyond that. Most of them are highly engaged. If you look at the core, they don't really have membership programs. They've only got a smattering of live events. They've got a huge broadcast audience, but no one's actually commercialising it properly yet. It's actually, if you work out how to commercialise it core properly, the world's your oyster. That's what we're all trying to do.
Yeah.
Just right here.
So I think my friend was offered the very first programming contract in Australia back in 2003. He ended up saying no, and he went to MIT to become a professor. I asked him what's holding esports back way back then, and he said, education also plays a part. So if high schools and college level sports gets involved, that can really help. So with basketball, AIS, they send maybe a dozen players a year over to college and the NCAA. Is there something similar that we could do in Australia where the government and education is involved?
You can tell Dan wants to talk about that.
Yeah. So last year for League of Legends, we worked with the Australian University Games, which is the big, as you guys probably know, it's a big tournament across pretty much every sport. And 40 universities across Australia and New Zealand took part in that, and we had every university had their own tournament within the university. Then they picked a team that played against the other unis in their state, and the states played against each other, and the two finals went through. So it was a big tournament, and we think that's a first big step. We also run a pretty robust high school program as well. So in New Zealand at the moment, there's a tournament coming up with 50 different high schools taking place just in the North Island alone. So as we kind of grow out that grassroots, I think that's actually touches on one of the questions earlier about how else we can improve the skill gap besides playing people around the world. It's growing the base and the grassroots for people who aspire to be professional. I think high school and uni is really important part of that.
Awesome. We've got one back there.
Yeah, I've been in esports for a while. I was a player and also a commentator. And I got out of it because two reasons. One, there was no money, so there's no career. And secondly, because, as I said, there's a massive skill difference. And to me, it comes down to the money. There's no money here, so you can't play it. You can't spend 8 to 12 hours a day practicing or anything like that. So what are some of the things that we can do as a nation in Australia to kind of, I guess, kick our growth a little bit so our players, our coaches, our commentators can get paid what they kind of deserve so they can, compete on that national level?
Get behind a team, like pick a pro team, buy merchandise, watch their games, like support them on social media. Get behind the team, and as the team then learns how to monetize that, they can bring more money in and start to pay their players. Just support it.
Is it just we don't have enough fans here, or are there other things holding it back?
There are enough fans.
Okay.
There are 1.5 million of them.
So why aren't we commercialising those?
I think it comes back. It's an industry in its infancy. Let's be honest. It's an industry. It's a sport. Largely, that's probably not even professional yet. So let's treat it with the right context, and build it for the longer term rather than try. And I think that's the worry that I would say is that a lot of people trying to make a lot of money. Not a lot, trying to make some money very quickly. This is a long game.
Do people who stand to benefit from commercialising? Should you go on to, if you're going to start up any other business and realise that you don't really got good your own money, there's no justification for not being able to pay your staff. Like, do you think for the people who do stand to benefit from commercialising, is there any justification for going, we can't really afford to pay right now? It's sort of, I really can't get away with that in any other industry. It's like,
well, that's why I think if you
I work in the film industry. If you go and run that to a crew over a Fox, you get sorted.
Well, I think that's where there will be a players' union at some point demanding a revenue sharing model, not a nominal fee determined by somebody else. That'll be the first thing I think comes to the industry, because we're the guys generating the revenue.
Yeah.
On the media side as well, I think to your point about getting a job and being a commentator and that sort of thing, it's always going to be, it's definitely going to get better from what it is now, but it's always going to be at an enthusiast level. As someone who's dabbled in many different kinds of enthusiast media, from sports journalism to music journalism to games journalism and stuff like that, it's always very competitive. You're never really getting, a lot of people think to themselves, I'd love to be a travel journalist and travel to Greece and write about that boat trip that I had. A lot of people would like to do that, which means the rates are just not what they are in other forms of media. So enthusiast media is always a little bit of a different game, but yeah, I do think it'll be much better than it is right now. Right there?
If you compare league to a more traditional sport like soccer or any sport, like I loved soccer when I was 5, and now I love soccer and I'm 25. I loved league in season 1, but now I barely even recognise that game. And I understand the need for games to develop, and I understand the need for companies to develop new games. But does that constant churn and I guess like change of games and the way we play negatively affect the ability for one day me and my kids to sit down and watch a league game? Because I can sit down with my dad and watch soccer because it's the same game that he played when he was 5. But if I'm 40 and league is still around, am I really going to want to sit down and watch that with my 20-year-old son? Is the change just too great? And is that one of the things that stops eSport really getting to the level of the more traditional sports?
It's a really good question.
It's a good question.
So basically, League of Legends is the only game Riot as a company makes. It's been out for 7 years, and every 3 weeks we change the game. Every 3 weeks there's like minor changes, and then once a year we make fairly substantial changes. So if you were to go back and look at the game from season 1, it looks very different to it does now. I think that if you left it the same and just say improve the graphics without changing the gameplay, it would help that it was more familiar. But the good thing about changing is that you can never master it, and you're always learning something new. And given that the games continue to grow quite well, we think that encouraging that relentless pursuit of mastery is the best thing for the game. But yeah, if you take some time off and you go back, there's a lot of new stuff to learn. And potentially that's too intimidating for some people, but for some other people it's like, oh wow, there's a new dragon buff or something like that. That's pretty cool. I'll learn about that. So,
and I think innovation is a key driver of ongoing sports engagement. So every major sport in Australia is in decline. from an engagement perspective. On an average compound annual growth rate of about 3%. And what do you do with brands that are in decline, that are mature and in decline? You have to innovate. The only sport that's innovated in Australia in the last 10 years, cricket, Big Bash.
Yeah.
You know, so you're seeing a spike of growth. So I think the innovation that League is able to bring, I don't know enough about it to know whether 3 weeks is too often or whatever, but I would say the innovation will be what keeps it relevant for longer if we were to look at the trend line of more traditional sports.
Yeah, that's innovation within the same game, which I'm a fan of with League of Legends, because it's not doing what something like Call of Duty is doing, which is splitting a community every single year. Very detrimental. Seems to work for them so far.
Yeah, the different models, whereas Call of Duty, even though it's online, you're basically selling a box, you're selling a game. So you play that game, you need someone to buy a new game, so you create another box, another game. Whereas the League of Legends model is that's keeping them engaged as micropayments within the game. So as long as it keeps the player base there engaged, the commercial money will keep flowing. And
yeah,
so,
for the Counter-Strike
doesn't get
players,
stale. Yeah.
No, so there were the Call of Duty players that are trying to watch games with their kid. You're not going to go back to Call of Duty 2 or something like that and watch all the matches. I think we're supposed to end right about now, so I might let. We can go for a little while longer, but did you want to? You're good.
Good time.
Just get one more back.
Sure, yeah.
Just that. How much do you see esports converging with the mainstream media? Maybe like a Twitch channel or Fox channel, something like that. How much do you see that as a possibility in the future?
I can tell you that from talks that I've had, the mainstream media is a lot more receptive to it. I'm not sure how much I can say. I talked to a few people who are talking to mainstream media and doing something like that. A little while ago we had Counter-Strike on SBS. There will be similar things in the future because SBS Viceland is quite receptive to that. Different places that I talk to, esports is almost like a buzzword nowadays, whereas 10 years ago you'd have to explain it to them. Now they're like, oh yes, this ticks one of our boxes. More mainstream mags who have nothing to do with gaming are asking for esports coverage. So things have definitely improved on that side of things. And then in the US you get MOBAs on ESPN and stuff like that a lot more often now. That's kind of commonplace now, I think. So that situation's definitely improving from my perspective, on my side of the fence. That's what it looks like.
If it's exclusive, if it's scarce and there's an audience, they'll buy it. That's their model, right? It's not complicated. So, look at Channel 10, they can't get any good content at the moment. They're backing things like Biggest Loser and it's been bumped up to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And they'll ship something in from America to try and retain an audience. So if it's exclusive and it's just theirs and it's scarce content and it comes with an audience, they'll pay for it.
Looking internationally, League of Legends did a $300 million deal with MLBAM, and then Turner Sports have started up the E-League. It's actually the new hot property over there. It's billions of dollars for rights and other sports, whereas esports is still affordable, but there's a bit of a land grab going on, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But esports is actually on that transition from traditional broadcast to digital. It's already on the digital side, so there is a train of thought, why would you go back to traditional broadcast when you're actually leading the charge into the digital environment? So it does open up some of the more mainstream audience, but all the kids are already on Twitch or YouTube or wherever. That's where they live.
Awesome. I might let Eileen off the hook because you need to run, don't you? Or?
No, just get the bathrooms with it.
If you want to,
This is awkward now, no one's watching it. So stay up Friday.
well, I'm happy to take people. If you wanted to.
Yeah, my question is probably more directed to David. So you've mentioned that your team's based in Sydney, somewhere harbour, Pinmont. I want to understand the reason behind placing them there when we've got NBN private to the premise in Canberra, and if that connectivity would actually be an increase in what we actually receive here in Sydney.
So this year has actually changed with it. It's actually the live events this year, so we're going to the Right Studios, which is 5 minutes down the road from where we're living. So the important thing about for the marketing is that you have to do interviews with them before and after the games, and you're seeing the game, but you're also seeing the plays in the corners. so you can actually interact with the real people and get the reactions, holding the head when they do something stupid, or the fist pumps when it goes right. So now it's more akin to a traditional sport where you're not only just watching a computer screen with kids sitting in pajamas at home, you're actually watching a live event. You obviously drove the change there. It's obviously been a step change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. For this year, we wanted them all. Well, we said to the teams, you need to be in Sydney once a week, and we want them to play in our studio. We want to interview them. We want to create all that engagement. Whether teams have the choice whether they move to Sydney or they live somewhere else and they commuted in, and they all ultimately chose to move to Sydney. Okay. That was up to them.
But we see ourselves as a global eSports club based in Sydney because eSports is actually borderless. We don't actually have the stadium, so we actually market ourselves that Indonesia, Philippines, places that have strong English, reasonable internet connectivity, and are gamers without their own big teams. So we can be a global brand, and that's what we're striving to be. Not quite for the TSM stage yet, but that's what you can do.
So on a national scale, what are companies in the esports industry doing to kind of boost that skill gap that you guys mentioned before in terms of talking to the people that can provide that connectivity, so to speak, so talking to the telcos who have the control over giving us the connectivity that we're looking for?
What are we actively doing on it? We're not doing anything on that actively. All our teams, they knew that one of the most important things when picking a house was to make sure it had internet. I don't know this for sure, but I'd be surprised if all of our teams aren't sitting on NBN.
We find all team houses and hub. We're in one, which has a little bit of a hub and then a Stratfield and Lidcombe. There's actually sort of areas sort of dotted around that have great NBN connectivity, but obviously as it goes on, that's going to broaden your options as the NBN spreads out. But it's not actually League of Legends is actually reasonably low spec to play, but it's actually to stream out. If you try and actually send content back the other way, that's where you really need the additional bandwidth.
Yeah, why don't we go with
as you guys mentioned how esports is more kind of intellectually or mentally focused compared to traditional sport. And I've heard stories about players burning out and that sort of issue. Is there a difference between the training programs provided for esports players compared to traditional physical sports players?
So we've been trying to implement the more traditional sports model, and as I said, everyone seems to follow the Koreans because they've been doing it 15 years, but Korean culture and Australian culture are very different. And so sitting away, grinding away in your cafe for 16 hours isn't the optimal way to get better at a game. So our guys do a gym session in the morning. They have sort of set blocks of scrims for 2 to 3 hours, and then do VOD reviews. And it's actually in between each game, stepping away. We use sports psychologists and coaches to try and work out ways to actually get the most out of your training time. It's not about volume; it's about quality. So we've got and it's test and learn. As I say, we definitely haven't mastered it yet, but we're trying a lot of new things that are different to the Korean model, which a lot of people follow.
A number of the teams have a physical workout built into their day to get them out of the house and get the blood flowing, break up the changes.
Is there anything different to physical sports?
I know the guys from Legacy, they all go to the gym together, and they'll just hit the treadmill, whatever they want to do, just to get them out of the house and to break up their day.
So I've worked on the performance side in traditional sports and esports. Obviously, there's different needs. One of the advantages of esports, I guess, is you don't get physical fatigue, so you can train that bit longer, but that doesn't mean you should. So it's about compartmentalising your day and making sure you're going through the right processes. But obviously, when you've got a sport like rugby league, there's a much larger physical component, so it's going to be weighted far more heavily to the physical side. Whereas, but rugby league has a mental component, and League of Legends has a physical component.
Right.
Does or will artificial intelligence play a role in esports? Particularly with the skill gap issue that we face in Australia.
There's a really good article on the other day, and obviously, AI is important for actual games themselves to actually give you some competition to play against. And they always use the analogy of the first computer beating the grandmaster in chess. But I think it can help with training potentially, but I think it's more for gaming rather than esports. Esports is always human v human, whereas with games, that's where the AI comes in. You do have AI characters within the game, the minions. You don't want to make them too strong, otherwise we're getting wiped out by the AI rather than playing the opponents. So Yeah, I think there's space for it, but I think the crux of it is that we 5 humans versus 5 humans in the game.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've never thought about that, but we in any competition where there's 2 people competing against each other, you want the winner to be the one that was better at what they're doing. You don't want anything outside of that to impact it. So that's the danger of, I guess, introducing anything like that.
I guess it introduces PvE. I mean, we think of esports as primarily PvP, but as soon as you have, I mean, I imagine there could be use for PvE in an esports context and seeing how people do that better. I don't think I've ever seen a major esports. I've seen certainly games that mix PvE and PvP.
Yeah, you don't want the sport to become a software race.
Yeah.
And other sports that have lost relevance over time have fallen into that trap where it becomes, a technology race rather than the skill of the athlete.
Yeah.
I don't think any sport that wants a long, sustainable future needs to keep that human aspect to it, because that's what we don't want to be. That's the key engagement point. Is what does pressure do to people?
Was it the article on connecting DeepMind to StarCraft 2 that you were talking about?
Yeah, I only scanned it, but I think that was the one they were talking about, yes.
Yeah. So, and DeepMind was one of those computers that famously beat someone at chess.
I think they were the original.
So it's graduated from chess years later to StarCraft 2. So we'll see if it can take on some of the pros. I think that's yet to be written. Do we have any more? You can come back in if you want.
Slow around the background. That's me.
So the statistic of the all 1.5 million engaged esports fan in Australia, that's obviously a really great number. However, I'm pretty sure that most of them are watching overseas leagues. From looking at Riot OPL's numbers last year, I'm pretty sure it was an average of 6,000 or so. So 6,000 out of 1.5 million isn't the greatest, but I understand it's split across different games, because obviously not everyone's the exact same fan of sport. I was just wondering what your plans were in general to kind of get one of the teams in Australia to be some sort of TSM-like brand where they won't actually have to do too much streaming in order to generate their own revenue. For example, with TSM, how there's Milena Bjergsen can just jump on for 2 hours in a week and pull 40,000 viewers just because he's that well known. Or anyone who joins the organization will end up having 10,000 followers. Was there some sort of plan to kind of get a team like the Chiefs or Legacy, who are probably the 2 most known guys?
So the numbers you mentioned are wrong, by the way. But anyway, it is an issue, right? So we refer to it as the basketball dilemma. So if you're a basketball fan in Australia, you're probably watching the NBA. You might not even know that Sydney had a team and then they didn't, and they do again. Like I only recently found that out. So that is a challenge for us. So the way we're combating that is through our teams. We want fans to have a relationship with their club and to follow that club and to know those pro players and to get an affinity with them that they can't get from following an overseas team. And that's why we put a lot of our effort into building up all of our 8 teams, including the Direwolves. But obviously Chiefs and Legacy have been in both grand finals for all of our grand finals, so they're a bit more known by people who are casually watching eSports. There we go. That was careful.
But what's this year's grand final?
Yeah, there we go. But at the end of the day, we want to give them a unique fandom experience they can have with a local team that they can't have from an international one.
But that will also need to stop there. You also need, as Eileen's been talking about, the local competition to be more competitive. As sports fans, we will always migrate to the best form of that content we can find. That's why we don't watch the NBL, and that's why Australia is the #1 market in the world for NBA league passes per capita. We want to find the best version of our passion. Yes, it's about building heroes, but it's also about having a credible and competitive local competition. And I started by talking about the A-League. The A-League is getting there now in terms of closing the gap between Australian football fans' favourite league to the Premier League. But we will always, as sports fans, regardless of what that is, if that's esports or archery, we will find the best version of that we can to watch. That's just the nature of who we are. Unless we've got a personal affinity with a player or a team, and we'll seek them out as well, but we'll always migrate to the best version of our passion. So it's about building those heroes, but also authenticating the local scene so that it is something we do want to watch and we do want to seek out.
Part of that is like providing a path, I think, as well to for potential greatness. So there's a path for a team in any esport to go all the way, go to the international competition, and if they are good enough, it is possible for them to take on the best. I know that's something that Riot's been working on. It's something that Blizzard's working on right now. They've been providing paths for Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm. And if you've looked at Blizzard's hiring page recently, they've gone on an absolute blitz hiring esports managers all over the world. So they're going to move into that in a big way. Other games less so. Other games grow more organically, and there's not that hope there. I feel for if you're a Counter-Strike fan, there's not that sort of view to global greatness. Champions Gaming Series was kind of a one-off, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good though. So yeah, as I said, peaked too early, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean that opportunity was awesome because we got to go to China and the US, and I claim to fame as I taught Kim Kardashian to play Xbox. She was really bad, made me feel better about myself. But yeah, like eventually, it will, when esports does blow up, which it is in the process of doing, we talk about the skill gap, we talk about why don't we get paid enough, we talk about where is it going, is it going to be televised? Yes to all of those things, like we'll breach the skill gap, it will be televised, it's just a matter of time and what time frame is that and how do we do that and what support do we have doing that. So, a great example is within the space of 6 to 12 months, everyone is now saying what's esports. Kids, I think it's 1 in 5 now, are saying I want to be a professional gamer. When I told my mum I quit a law firm and came home and said, yay, I'm going to be playing Xbox, she was like, what the hell? Got a scotch out and a couple of Xanax, so that was great. But, so now it's actually legitimised and it's a thing to do. It's an actual, what people are saying is a profession. So I think that's where the distinct value proposition is now, that it actually is a viable thing. Yes, you're not getting paid that much compared to other countries, but you are getting paid, and that's the main thing. How much you get paid depends on that skill and how much people work. You're not going to just get handed, bread packet and away you go. This is esports. You're going to get paid as much as everyone else. People have to work towards it. And I think that is becoming a reality mostly in Australian esports. It's a timing factor. So watch this space in 12 months.
All right, everyone, that's all the time that we have. It's very good.
Dinner.
Yeah, we even had a little ding.
This is great.
That's what I was waiting for. I do want to thank Eileen, I want to thank Dan, I want to thank Dave and Andrew. Thanks very much to our panel. It was great. I learned things, and let's all mingle.
Thanks, Jeremy.